Now, Karen, you should, I don't even know why. This is the thing. They talk about a Big Bang. That's a theory. That's why I call it the Big Bang Theory. For the Egyptians, maybe 6 millennia before you get any of this bang stuff, they're saying, no. Everything that exists now always existed. All it has been doing is changing form. This is Egyptian theology. And so their thing is, what we experience now as part of the speech of this constant rhythm, this constant vibration, this radiation of everything that exists, what we are experiencing in our limited glimpse is part of that process. And so, I mentioned this because it's very important. They say, in the beginning, there was darkness, there was movement, and you couldn't distinguish. We were in it. We were all in it, but we were not in the form we're in now. And then there's a moment when there is a speech that emerges out of that. They call that moment the pre-speech, the noon. N-U-N is how we were spelling in English, but if you saw it in the glyphs, it's pictures with waves of water. Now, for those of y'all who watched Beyonce Black is King, the water is at the beginning. And when she says to the baby she's carrying down the beach, you're bigger than a Bible verse, you ain't know what, she is putting a comedic marker down, because of course that's how Genesis emerges. There's darkness moving on the face of the deep. They took that from the Egyptians. Then God, then whatever we call the creator speaks itself into existence. That's still in Genesis. But the Egyptians are like, yeah, in fact, let me go to, many ways, the teacher of Maulana Karenga, Jacob Carrruthers. This is the book right here, Medu Neter, Divine Speech. This is the one. Jacob Carrruthers, I love this brother right here. Jacob Carrruthers is from Texas. He went to Phyllis Wheatley High School, who's one of their rivals was, of course, Jack Yates High School, where Big George Floyd went to school. He's from Houston. He was one of the first Black students to integrate the University of Texas. His friend was Hyman Sweat versus Painter, the law case that they argued to get into University of Texas. He dropped out of law school. He said, I can't stand this segregation stuff. Went and got a PhD at University of Colorado Boulder. One of his childhood teachers at his undergrad, Sam Houston College, Houston Tillotson now, was James Farmer Sr. That was the character, of course, that Forrest Whitaker played in The Great Debaters. So he's all dyed in the wool Black. His father was Church of Christ minister. So he came up like we in the church, and he was a PK. You understand, preacher's kid. So Carruthers gets fascinated with Egyptian language later in life, in his 40s, when he's in Chicago working at the Center for Inner City Studies. It's now named the Jacob Carruthers Center for Inner City Studies. It's a brilliant. He is really, in many ways, the hub of an intellectual network in this country that takes the study of African culture very seriously and ancient Egyptian culture through language very seriously. That's why I bristle when people say hotel. I'm like, yeah, that's a very important word, and I know why it's used, and I understand the critique. In fact, I embrace the critique, because we got to be better than that. But playing with that language allows us to evade the deep intellectual work. So let me just show you what Karenga is drawing from and puts where we can get it in English. Carruthers gonna put it in English too, but he gonna put the glyphs with it. So when you see here, he puts the glyphs, he translates. So he says, when speech happened or came into being, this is from what they call, this is the Egyptian concept of the Sept Tepi. He says, the Egyptians say, what happened the first time something happened? In other words, that's what we're looking for, origins, right? What happened? Because something had to happen for us to get here. I know how my mother gave birth to me, and she and my father had sex. I know where that. So what happened the first time? The Egyptians say, Keper Medet. That's a transliteration of the glyphs. Keper is a glyph. If you saw it, it's a picture of a little bug, like a beetle. They call it a dung beetle, because this beetle rolls. It gives birth to eggs, and it puts the eggs in the soil, and then it rolls the soil into a ball. The ball is actually dung from the beetle. That's why I call it a dung beetle. And that ball of dung protects those eggs, keeps them warm until they are born. They come out of that. The Egyptians say that's a metaphor for, in other words, that ball, that represents the noon. That's the stuff. And so he says, Keper Medet, translated into English, when speech happened, came into being, the universe belonged to me. I existed alone. Who is that I? That's that I that the roster's talking about. Computers, the laptops, everything, the dirt, the birds, all that stuff is I. I and I. It's I. He says, Then the next line, which is in it, Ray, I won't do the transliteration. I'll just read the English. It says, I am Ray in his first appearance, or its first appearance, really, more appropriately. Ray, meaning what? I am the sun. Because they're also looking at the earth. And they say every morning that big fiery ball come up, and every night it goes over there. So this has been happening forever. And then somebody say, yeah, but it had to happen the first time at some point. They're using the sun as a metaphor. Again, when people talk about African religion, are they worshiping it? No, everybody shut up. Because what you scientists have now discovered, call yourself discovering, is it's all connected and there's dark matter and everything. Yeah, guess what? The Africans knew that a long time ago because they have the first human beings. They've been looking at the stars for 100,000 years. Do you really think you, who've been doing this for about 75 years, no more than them, and you think you reading these stories like they're children? No, they have reduced it so that a child can understand it. So they're not saying the sun is God. What they're saying is this form of repetition is the form of reality. Everything repeats. One day the sun is going to burst and the earth is going to burn up. The Egyptians are like, everybody calm down. Are you going away then? Yes. No. You are part of this cycle. This thing is going to come back. Oh, I see. Now y'all want to make movies about it now. And time travel. And yeah, Matthew McConaughey is talking to his daughter. And the Egyptians sit there like, yeah, they catching up. It's going to take them another 100 years, though. They really are struggling because they won't connect. What they've done is separate science from religion. And that's why I say Neil deGrasse Tyson can say, I don't know, no, you're a scientist, which means you do believe. Why? Because if you didn't believe, you wouldn't keep looking. Why? Because you, as an article of faith, have taken it that there's some rhythm to this. And even when you say there's chaos, well, if there's chaos, you should go into another line of work. Because no, you know that, and in fact, this is where I want to go. I'll end with this very quickly. He says, and in fact, the first occasion is when you have the first speech. And like I said, we just dropping breadcrumbs today. We could talk more about this. When you see at the beginning of Black is King, Beyonce walking with that baby down the beach, and you see those elders there, and you see the sisters with the stuff on their head, and she says, you bigger than a Bible verse, and then she connects it with a gloss. And I don't know this, I don't know her, but I'm listening to her, and I'm listening to the way she's narrating this, and it's absolutely the Egyptian thing. We came out of everything that already existed, and the moment of speech does it. And then she says, you are great, and then she says, and I'm thinking, in ancient Egyptian language, means great. And I'm saying, this child, somebody, she's trying to, because then she gets into Osiris knot. But here's where I want to go with it. Let me look at when this was published. This came out, this book I'm about to show you came out in 2012. Okay, yeah, because I call her my child. She's not my blood child, but this is my girl, Shanice Thompson. She's a professor at Bowie State University, but I had Shanice since she was 16 years old. She's from North Philly. She was my Freedom School kids. And she got so caught up in studying Egyptian language and so caught up in studying her Eastern culture, she said, I want to come where you are. So she left, when she graduated from high school in Philly, she came to Howard on full scholarship. She was Gates Millennium Scholar. And then she left there, went to Boston University, got a master's in African American Studies, then went to Ohio State and got a PhD. And in fact, I went out for her dissertation defense last year. She did her dissertation on Beyonce's Lemonade, and she tied it to the Orisha and the Yoruba. And now she's teaching at Bowie State. This child from Philadelphia, working class family, but this is the point. Anybody can do it. But the reason I bring it up is because Shanice was an undergrad when this book came out. I'm about to show you. The Smithsonian Museum of African Art, and they do incredible catalogs. And when we talk about religion in depth, we're going to talk more about it. This is their catalog that they had an exhibition called African Cosmos. African Cosmos, Stellar Arts. The lady who was the curator who kind of edited this volume was still at work. I don't think she's there anymore. Christine Kramer. I knew this catalog was coming out. So I emailed Christine Kramer and I said, I'm down there all the time. I usually go on the weekends. I just hang out in the Museum of African Art. By the way, people can't get into the Museum of African American History and Culture. Don't be disappointed. Go over to the Museum of African Art. It is where that other museum begins. In fact, there should be a real partnership between those two. Because as John Henry Clark always say to us, if you start your history with slavery, everything since then looks like progress. No, start with the African stuff. You won't understand anything in that African American museum until and that African museum is rarely visited. It's like, where are all the people? We should be starting here. So this exhibit came out. I emailed her and I said, I want to bring my class down. Dr. Kramer. Oh, yes, please come. We would love to. She said, I'll walk you through it. I said, yeah, because I have a lot of her catalog. She does a lot of important work. She was like one of the content people at the Museum of African Art. An Africanist, knows a lot of stuff. So I bring the students down. Shanice is with me. Some of the students are in Mario Beatty, including Shanice, are in Dr. Beatty's Egyptian hieroglyphs class. Maybe about 10 or 15 of them. I got about 40 students. So we come down. She meets us. She's all happy. A little white woman. I mean, very, very, hey, I'm so nice to see you. Okay, yes, come on. So we start the exhibit. The first stage, the exhibit African Cosmos is about how African people look at what we would call astronomy. This is where we're going to tie Neil deGrasse Tyson in. So they start the discussion, which has got the Zulu, the Akan, the Yoruba, all over Africa. They got pieces from the museum, because see, the thing to understand about African religious traditions, what we would call religion, we'll talk about that in a minute, that word really doesn't fit, because they don't separate science and sacred. They don't separate any of that stuff. So you got to look at the art, you got to listen to the music, you got to see the dance, and you will see, and you got to look at the science. Metallurgy, there's a whole exhibition catalog on iron, for example. That's the latest one they put out. That, when we talk about this in depth, we had to get into that, because iron, for them, iron is a metal that replicates or is symbolic of blood, because iron is in our blood. It's like iron is the metal we use in the material world for things that we're duplicating from the human body and the spiritual world. So if you're going to be a blacksmith, you have to be initiated into the spiritual traditions. So let me finish. I'll finish the story right quick. So the thing about Kramer and them and the African Museum generally, because Janetta Cole was the director at the time, and I would see Janetta Cole, Dr. Cole, sometime I'd be in the bookstore, she'd come in right quick, and I always knew Janetta Cole, had something to do with the books, because they had some of the best books. And I said, Dr. Cole, I know you in here picking these books. And she said, yes, I always make sure that we have the most important. I said, I know, because you're an anthropologist. You know what I'm saying? That's why you want educators in charge of education institutions. So at any rate, we're there. We're in the first gallery. Dr. Kramer, this little lady, white lady, she says, and this is the Egyptian. The Egyptians believed that Ra, the sun god, and then we let her talk for a while. And here's a little picture, you got one of the papyrus there, and they're talking about inhabiting the heavens, this kind of thing. And so as she's talking, we let her talk about 4 or 5 minutes. And she said, let's move on. I said, hold on, Dr. Kramer, could we stay here just for a second? She said, yes. You have questions? I said, no, I just want to check something. Now, I could read what it wrote, but I said, Shanice, what'd that say? Shanice starts translating the glyphs. I am the divine. When I happen, speech itself happens. This professor, Christine Kramer, one of the leading authorities in African art in the world, she's like, you can read that? Shanice never looked back at her. Yeah. And then and she said, and I'm not alone. She looked around and for the first time in the tour, she could see us. Going back to the Leslie Odom piece, we don't need you in this exhibit. We're very glad, and thank you for putting this catalog. It's very important. But please understand that what Jacob Carrruthers used to teach us, African people must break the chain that link us to other people's ideas and talk to our ancestors without interpreters. In other words, Jacob Carrruthers would say, it's one thing if you got to read this in English, but once you understand what you're looking at, these other people can come. We want you to learn. But what we're not going to do is trust what you say about my mother. I'm going to talk to my mother without you. I don't need you as an interpreter. That's the same way. Go ahead. That's what I said. And this is science.
So I'm watching your time because I know you have to go.